Everybody, welcome. We are Super Monkey Fighters. I am Loki. With me is Bytor and Monkey Feathers. And we're going to start a new show talking about movies. We're not quite sure what we're going to call it yet. Probably something along the lines of what would you change? That may update as we go further. Probably not because we're lazy.
Now, is it Bytor or Papa Nugget?
Papa Nugget.
Yes.
Is it Papa Nugget now?
I think it's Papa Nugget.
I'm going to have to relearn
He's officially
that.
changed it. He's officially changed it.
Known by many names. AKA
Most
Bytor,
recently, Papa
AKA
Nugget.
Papa Nugget.
And who knows, it'll probably change again.
Probably. We'll update as we go. Anyway, we're going to discuss some movies here. They're probably movies that have been out for a while, especially during these times. It's tough when no new movies come out and nobody goes to movie theaters. So we're going to discuss the movie Passengers, came out in 2016. It is listed as an American science fiction romance film. It's set in 2343, was directed by Morten Tyldum. Stars Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt. Also has some appearances by Michael Sheen and Laurence Fishburne. And the best role in the entire film, Andy Garcia. Best performance of an actor ever. Should have won an Oscar. Was robbed. He's literally in the film for 2 seconds, and I think he has one line, maybe.
No, I actually don't think he has any.
Does he not even speak? Yeah.
I don't recall him speaking.
I don't remember him speaking.
Yeah, he shows up at the very, very end. So the idea behind the film, if you haven't seen it, for the first time, spoilers, we are going to be talking about the film in great detail. So if you want to see it and don't want it spoilered? Sure, that's
Spoilered.
a word. That's how word works. Then, maybe go watch the movie first and then come back. But the idea behind the film is that they are on a colony ship, everybody's in hypersleep, and people are accidentally woken up early, and two people, 3 people eventually. It's kind of about their interactions and some, I don't know, trying not to get into too many spoilers right now because we'll get into it in detail, but it's a love story / could have been a thriller, really kind of a strange way it was told, so... Came out, like I said, it came out in 2016. I don't know. I really didn't enjoy this movie. I didn't enjoy it the first time I saw it, but I've used it as an example of what I would do differently in a film to make it more entertaining, even if it's just to me, because that's all I really care about. So before I get into my thoughts on it, what did you guys think about it?
It's kind of like the middle line. It wasn't necessarily good. It wasn't necessarily bad. It just kind of coasted through.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't, it's not one of those movies that I would have been happy to see again. Because there are those movies that are bad that you're like, man, it's bad, but it's like, I'll see it again just for the entertainment value. This wasn't one of them. In knowing that we had to see it again as a refresher for this video, I was just like, man.
Yeah, I had to force myself to watch through it. So
yeah.
I mean, I would say the one thing that it does have going for it was at least able to keep my attention throughout the movie. I didn't find myself wandering as much as other movies. And so it had that. And I think it was actually more enjoyable to watch it a second time than the first time. Just because the first time you don't know how it ends, and so it's more of a letdown than when you see you know it's coming, and so the second time is actually more enjoyable because you know how it's going to end.
So the thing I liked the most about it was the set designs. I liked the layout of the ship, the way it looked, some of the architecture, the stairs and the ritzy cabin were really cool.
But I have a hard time with
the special effects. I found that for me personally, and granted, there's going to be people who are going to say like, special effects sucked. Why did they do it this way? But in watching it, I found that a lot of the special effects, the space at environment, I was like, man, it's really kind of beautiful looking. And then you get to the movie and you're just like, but I have something beautiful to look at least, instead of a plot.
The thing that gets me about space movies is just how unrealistic all of it always is, because there's no way they're going to build a ship like that. Like, I don't think ever a ship's ever going to be built like that. And it's like, we can't even take a plane ride today without getting crammed into a sardine can. And you're telling me that we're going to have spaceships that have massive atriums that has so much unused space.
Yeah.
Like, it's completely unrealistic.
Well, and that was another thing that I thought was unrealistic, was it's completely unmanned. Everyone's asleep. There's no people awake. But they make a point of pointing out that some of the people are effectively indentured servants. Like, they would have had people who lived their entire lives on that ship just to maintain everything.
I felt that was really illogical, considering you're traveling who knows how long through space, and you don't know what you're going to encounter.
Well,
and the fact that you have no one awake to potentially fix a problem that is going on.
Just don't worry about the details.
Yeah. That's really the movie.
Just ignore the details.
Don't pay attention to the guy behind the curtain. He's not really there.
Forget all of it. Don't pay attention to these things. Just do what we want you to do, and the musical cues will tell you what to feel, and that's that. That was one of the things I really didn't like that goes into that same technology, is it's MacGuffins or anti-MacGuffins, right? We have this technology that allows us to do this thing for the plot, but we don't have this technology for the plot. So there was just a lot of convenient technological either limitations or advancements that only served the plot, that weren't realistic, that pulled you out of the film, because you just think, why don't they just, they can fly through space and do all these crazy things. Why don't they just have contingencies for these things? Like we have these days, redundant systems, those kinds of things. I mean, this is really, that pulled you out. And I think that sets the stage for just, you lose that suspension of disbelief, and it makes it hard to connect with anything in the movie. Is there anything else you guys really liked about the movie?
Okay, so now that we're going to start really discussing likes and dislikes, again, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it. One of the main likes that I had for this was when Jim, he's isolated for a year, struggling. And then he comes, like, during that time, he hasn't woken up anyone, which I feel like, oh, that's interesting. Because for him to be alone for so long, and then he comes across Aurora, and he's struggling to decide if he's going to wake her up. And that's something that I liked, because he contemplated killing himself, and then he didn't. And then he's now struggling to decide if he's going to wake someone up. And I liked that it wasn't just immediate, that it was a struggle of, I'm going to condemn someone else to death, basically. And it wasn't immediate. And that was something that I did like, because I think if he just, oh, I like this pretty woman, I'm going to wake her up, I think that would have set me out of the movie a lot quicker than other things.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the main point, or one of the main points of the movie, is that whole choice to wake her up, because it's revisited when she learns that he did that, and so then that builds further onto the plot. And so yeah, there's a lot of the plot that's based around that choice. And so yeah, if they were to quickly just kind of move through that whole decision-making process and just his emotional response to it, then yeah, that would feel really flimsy.
And with feeling really flimsy, because they did showcase and they did talk about as well how it took months and months of the decision making process, but they did most of that through montage. Like the first half of the movie is pretty much montage to show the passage of time, and I think it would have been far more impactful to if the first 20 minutes of the movie was a one constant unbroken shot as he discovers that he's alone and he starts going through that terror, and the audience gets to go through that with him, and it's much more uncomfortable. I think that would help identify with him more. And then you do just a big time jump where he's got a beard and he's been trying to break into the command deck or whatever it is, and you show that he's gone through all this time. I think that would have been a lot more impactful, without changing really anything else about the story. Just take that one shot and just follow him as he goes through the empty ship and sees everything in real time comes to those realizations. I think that would have been a lot more interesting, at least to me. It's funny, when I was in the movie theaters 4 years ago, I had that thought that in order to make this really interesting to me would probably make it not interesting to anyone else in the movie theater, because they would get uncomfortable and not like it because they were uncomfortable, and it would draw me into the story more.
I guess it depends on the person, because there are those movies that people like, what is it, like 127 Hours with James Franco, where it's just a completely uncomfortable movie. And there were people who were leaving because it was uncomfortable, but people also sat through it and watched it. So I think that it's going to depend on the person. Who knows, maybe people who are watching this are thinking the exact same thing that you are. Man, if you changed it this way, it would have been better. But now you gave your dislike and not your like. So what is your like?
I gave you my like earlier. My like was the sets. I liked the way that looked.
Oh.
I actually also really liked Michael Sheen as the android bartender.
Yeah.
He's a very good actor. And it's a smaller part, but he does it justice. He does it really well. The story was kind of interesting, but they kind of duplicated things. You see, and it's a other side of the coin. So you see Jim go through everything. He watches every movie they have. He plays all the games. He eats all the food, those kinds of things. He goes out into space in a spacesuit, and it's all sad when he's alone. And you know that because of the music. So they're telling you what to feel with the music. And then after Aurora wakes up, or after he wakes up Aurora, they do all those same things again, but he's happy. And so you've got happy music. And so, but it's the same things. You're still seeing the same things over and over again. And so half of the movie is done over again.
Repeat.
Yeah, it's just repeat.
But it's happy repeat.
It's happy repeat. And then it gets into
You're supposed to feel happy now.
It gets into the action movie sequence where it's like, oh, guess what? There really is something big and bad that's wrong that they have to track down.
And to me, that's where the movie starts to kind of break apart for me.
Yeah.
Because, so they introduce Gus, which ends up
played by Laurence
Fishburne.
Or Deus Ex Morpheus.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to me, he's a character that is only there to give them access. Yeah, give them access to the area of the ship that they need.
Yeah.
And then he dies.
To just move forward. I mean, it really is that. He
doesn't do anything besides that.
He's there for
there's just no character development. It's
he does give some.
They diagnose him with 600 diseases or diagnoses.
Yeah.
Or diagnosi.
And that's really where it was. It wasn't character at all with anything in the movie. It was more just plot. Like all of the characters are just devices to move this story kind of all over the place. It doesn't really go in one direction. It's a love story / creepy thriller movie, and then it's an action movie, and then it's back to a happy love story. It's
like, oh, we need to save the ship all of a sudden, and let's go do this thing.
And for some reason, there's an obstacle shouldn't be an obstacle, and we've got to find where the problem is, and the problem is a big freaking hole in the ship that's destroyed the computer that runs the engine, but the computer couldn't tell us that. Like, it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to walk into the room and then it will tell you that it's malfunctioning. Like, it couldn't figure that out anywhere else or alert anyone or have any
in the
fail
command
safes.
center where it's diagnosing everything but that.
And then they magically just have spare parts where all they got to do is just plug it in, and then a door doesn't open, and they got to go open the door.
It's like every IT problem. Have you tried turning it on and off?
It really
again?
is.
Yep.
So then, what would you change, Morgan, to make it better?
Like, to me, and this goes not just with this movie, but I think just movies in general. It's like, I think great movies are, they all rest on character development, in my opinion. And so if people can't connect with characters to some degree, whether good or bad, then movies suck. And so I would invest more in character development. Like, you've got to be able to connect to some degree with the characters in order to enjoy it. And even with Gus, like they could turn him into something more if they wanted, but they didn't.
Instead of just killing him off 2 minutes later.
Like, at least make something, like, make me feel something that when he dies, not just, oh, well, Gus died. So sad.
Well, and there is
he's not important.
They play up that somebody's going to have to sacrifice themselves. Like, that's your perfect moment in that story to where he can be that.
Yeah. And
have him around for longer so that they actually care about him. Like, they met him a day before and then he died, and that was that. You know,
Well, yeah, and I mean, it seemed like they kind of tried where Aurora was talking with him, and they were talking about, because Gus knew that Jim woke her up, and so they kind of started to go down that path, but then
they cut it short because they had to move the story forward. One of the things that really stood out to me is watching it the second time is they really are caricatures. They're not characters. Like, Jim fits this idea of hero archetype sort of thing, and she fits this idea of, well, I mean, she's Sleeping Beauty. I mean, it's literally her name is Aurora. That's the name of Sleeping Beauty. I remember groaning in the theater when I saw her name and just went, oh, geez, you're really going that way. But they do everything in such a kind of cliche way that they don't really resonate as people. They're more they're puppets up on screen.
Dance, monkey, dance.
I actually did leave a note as I watched it that said that Jim is literally the Lego guy, which is funny because he's the voice in the Lego movie.
Yeah.
Like, the Lego movie, he's the normal, he's too normal, and it's like, yeah, that's him. He is that thing. And it just
right, and to me, characters have to have faults. Like I hate characters that are perfect because they're so boring.
Yeah.
And like what was Jim's faults? Like that he woke Aurora up?
Well, that's a fault though. See,
but he struggles with that whole kind of a thing.
Right, but that's his only fault?
Yeah.
Like, that's it?
You know, the whole relationship thing between Aurora and Jim, that's something that I would drastically change, because with seeing the trailer, I was thinking, oh, okay, so Jim, his pod, malfunctions or whatever, and he's awake. And then it gives the illusion that the same thing happened to Aurora. But then watching the movie, you find out, no, he straight up woke her up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He just, he broke her pod and now she's awake. And I know that, Tyson, you were like, oh, if I wasn't changing a whole lot about this movie and it was just this small little thing, I would change the whole relationship on how it was built. Because if you went the route of the trailer and actually had Jim wake up, okay, he's awake, he's, trying to figure out a way to go back to sleep. And that's happening for like 3 or 4 months. And then maybe another pod malfunctions and it's Aurora's. And it actually malfunctions and not him waking her up. And then these two people are bonding together as they're trying to figure out a way to, go back to sleep or figure out why are we awake, what happened, things like that. And actually build a relationship that way instead of this creepy stalker dude who knows everything about her. And then at the end of the movie, she's just like, oh, I'll ignore that.
Well, and
it's fine. I'll stay with you.
That's where
we'll live happily together.
It doesn't really solidify itself as any one genre, and it does parts of those. So I think if it had gone down the actual romance path, that would have made a lot more sense. Because
that would have been so much more boring.
Yeah, and that's
like
okay, but you have pick a lane. Yeah. You either have a romance movie and you build it as a romance movie and you build it like that, or you build it as at the end of the movie she goes back to sleep.
And I think
because I don't think granted, I can't speak for everyone, but I know personally, if I found out a guy like that first stalked me and found out everything about me and then screwed me over by waking me up and essentially killing me, and then like at the end I'm given the option of getting away from him, I'm going to kind of choose the option of getting away from him.
And that was, I think it was Nerdwriter who he did a video who said, if you change the perspective from Jim to Aurora, it's a horror movie and it's a lot more interesting is what he said. And what I think is if you stick with the lane of it's a romance movie, it's kind of a boring romance movie. If you stick with the lane of a thriller and it's her discovering that he woke her up and he's not who he says and all those kinds of things, it's just your run-of-the-mill thriller. There's nothing unique or interesting about it. One of the big things I would have, as I've talked about it over the years, is you show his struggle with it, and rather than he sees her right after he was going to kill himself, and then he goes and looks into who she is, you go the route of he's gone through all the entertainment on the ship, he's bored out of his mind, so he starts going through the crew profiles just for entertainment. And that's where he meets her and falls in love, because it mirrors more of a social media stalker, makes him really creepy, and gives a point for people in the audience to identify with her a lot more. And then he goes through and wakes her up, and then she finds out all those kinds of things. And then she does hate him, and she never forgives him until the end, maybe when he sacrifices himself to save everybody, that he redeems herself or himself in her eyes for the sacrifice. But then you end with her weighing that same decision. What do I do? Do I sit here by myself for 90 years? Do I wake someone else up? Do I, and then you leave it with that question.
That could have been interesting if they did it that route, because if they kill Jim off, there's no happy ending for them or, whatever that happened in the movie. And then end it on that same, leave it up to the audience of what she decides to do. Does she go the route of Jim and wake someone up? Or, she lives out the rest of her life on the ship alone and just leave it up for the audience to interpret. That could have been interesting. But, granted, the route that they went, it just became a jumbled mess of thriller, romance, action, and then they threw it together, and then you got this movie. Yeah. And so my changes would have just made it a boring thriller or a boring romance movie, but you just got a jumbled mess with this, where you don't really have one specific genre, I guess.
Well, then that...
Right, and
sorry.
I'm trying to remember, like, what was the reason why she fell back in love with him?
There really wasn't.
Well, I was going to say, basically, it was, oh, you're going to sacrifice yourself to save us.
Right.
And I can't live on the ship without you. And I think it was just kind of along the lines of you're sacrificing yourself to save everyone. And you're willing to do that. I think that was more along the lines of why. But
that seems pretty weak to me.
Yeah. Or is it
great?
Or is it go die and save me?
How
and we're
dare
good.
you?
Right. Or is it just that I don't want to live by myself, or I don't want to have to make the decision to wake someone else up. So I don't want to be stuck alone on the ship. And so that's why I
can't
love
tell you
you
her
now.
reasoning because I don't think it was really fully explained.
Well, but even when
wasn't.
she gets
Why?
the option at the end, the other MacGuffin of, oh, by the way, we totally could have gone back to sleep. She's like, well, no, I can't leave you.
But if he went
I
back to
think that
sleep,
was
then
just-
everyone would have been dead because there's a giant meteor in the ship, and no one would have been there to save them.
Because it was
No
fate.
one would have been there to just pull out the drive and plug a new drive in.
Yeah.
No one would have been there.
Well, and that's, if you do the beginning where you build it up where the audience identifies with him, it makes his betrayal of her when he wakes her up a betrayal to the audience. And so he flips from that hero to the villain, and he's the guy you hate. I mean, it make him a little bit more of kind of like Walter White, where he's the main character. He's the one that people are following around and maybe rooting for, but he's also the villain. He's a more interesting character than just this kind of two-dimensional, sort of thing. And they just didn't hit the mark on that for me. And that's really where I left a note that said it's an hour into the movie and I don't care anymore. I think it's just before all the action sequences happen. And it's like you said, Morgan, you're just like, that's really where the movie falls apart. It's like, oh, we don't know what to do. Great.
It's like, we'll just throw some stuff together and run around
It's
real
now
fast.
an action movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they make it, he's got to sacrifice himself, but then he doesn't die and she's got to save him. And it's just, yeah.
Yeah, and you can see it all coming. It seems pretty cliche, and it's like, oh, I didn't totally see that he was going to live, and that there would be something else that he would need to go do. It wouldn't be that easy. Like,
What? Trash Noun is such a great movie.
Well, and
Dare
then
you.
the end, which is the best scene in the movie, where the ship's a jungle somehow. And
somehow, because now there's animals.
And Andy Garcia shows up.
Where the animals come from. And not only that, but how is there a giant tree growing in? Like, there's no sun.
Well, and that's one of the other
right?
weird things. There's a scene when they're still in love, before she knows anything, where they're flying past a star and the ship announces it like, oh, on your left. They're like, why would the ship do that? Nothing would be on and running.
No one would be awake.
There probably
No one
wouldn't
would
be
awake at
oxygen
that
in
time.
the ship. It's just all those things you start thinking about, it just all falls apart.
Imagine that. He wakes up to find out there's no oxygen on the ship. End of movie.
There's 4 months worth of
He just
oxygen
dies.
and he just slowly suffocates.
Well, with a giant hole in the ship, you wonder how there is oxygen, because wouldn't it just all get sucked out into space?
Yeah, it was. Well, and that one room was the only place, but that was in the middle of the ship.
That whole, how a meteor that hit the ship and went through was causing random issues within the ship that just caused
It was
little
malfunctioning the computer.
glitches. But that was the power core, right?
So to be fair, it wasn't like a NASA or a military ship. It was a big corporation. So I'm sure they cut corners everywhere. But that also
The
lends
shield
to
really doesn't. The shield really doesn't repel meteors. It allows one or two through just for the excitement factor. Are we gonna live? Are we gonna die?
Well, they could have done like the Fallout. In Fallout, every time you find a vault, there's usually some experiment that was going on inside the vault. The corporation was experimenting on all the people in there. That's what this was, where they're like, we want to see what it's like if we wake one guy up and see what he does. And it was just the evil corporation taking over. But looking at Metacritic on it as well, because we all said it's kind of a middling movie. It's really not great, really just kind of middle of the road. Audience scores are right down the line too. I think it was like a 60 something percent on Metacritic. Critics hated it, which
It's not surprising.
critics were like 30%. So yeah,
Still not surprising.
the budget was between 110, 150 million for this, and its box office was 303. So it wasn't a failure, but it wasn't the knock out of the park success like a lot of movies are these days. It's weird to think that
days.
303 million is not,
Yeah.
back when the iconic movies like from our childhoods were, 100 million was
Expensive.
their budgets were 50 million. That was expensive. And,
Yeah.
they made 150, 200, but all right. Well, that was first episode of this. What would you change? Or
What did you
three
like?
white people complain about movies. I don't know what we're going to call this. Yeah. So YouTube stuff, leave like, comments, subscribe, all those fun things.
Leave a comment down.
Let us know.
Leave a comment down in the section of anything that you would change that we didn't cover, or if this is your favorite movie and you hate us now because we trashed it. So, yeah,
And let us know what else we should watch, what we should talk about next.
we're always open for ideas.